Why is it that the most important thing in our life is often the thing we know the least about? In this episode, let's look deeper at righteousness. Once again, let's establish the fact that all of our discussions rely on the foundation that Jesus is the Son of God, foretold of in the Scriptures, was born of a virgin, lived a sinless life, and was crucified to pay the penalty for our sin. Then Jesus rose again from death to life and will return one day. And thanks to Jesus, we have the gospel, the good news, that you can be changed and you don't have to stay the same anymore. You don't have to live separated from God, and you can be delivered from your daily sin. For not knowing about God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own, they did not subject themselves to the righteousness of God.
What?
Let me say that one more time. Seeking to establish their own, they did not subject themselves to God. Well, that certainly was dramatic, but it does make a good point. Many religious people falsely claim to be right with God simply because they never sought to know or follow the real way. One of these claims is that nothing is required on their part to be made right with God because Jesus is our righteousness. Now, this is what I call magic wand righteousness. But there is no sweet fairy, you know who, claim that because Jesus is righteous, then so are we just automatically, like magic. They play this game hoping once again that they can keep their undelivered lifestyle hidden and still claim Christianity. But it does no good to play a religious hide and seek with your sin. It does no good when you outwardly appear righteous to men, but inwardly are full of hypocrisy. So, if a made-up magic religion can't make you righteous, well, what does? Romans 4:9 states that Abraham's faith was credited to him as righteousness. Abraham was made righteous with God because he faith trusted. All right, so what was Abraham trusting? Did he just decide one day to put his faith in a mute, made-up God? No, not at all. Abraham trusted the promises of God. And how were the promises given to Abraham? Now, the promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed. Abe's faith came from hearing God's voice. And what did he do with those spoken promises of God? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. So Abraham was considered right with God because he believed what God spoke. Now, you may be shocked to know that this gospel message was preached to Abraham beforehand.
This is ridiculous.
Galatians 3:8 states that the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel beforehand to Abraham. Now, this verse goes directly against the doctrine of almost all Christendom today. They say that grace did not exist in the Old Testament. So I'm going to have to pause right here and draw the proverbial line in the sand and say, that is a false doctrine.
The unmitigated gall.
First of all, we know that the correct definition for biblical grace is a changing influence from God. Well, that happens often in the Old Testament, including with Abraham. And secondly, Galatians 3:8 uses the term gospel. And we know grace is certainly part of the gospel. Amazing, isn't it? Okay, back to faith. Galatians 3:17. What I am saying is this: the law, which came 430 years later, does not invalidate a covenant previously ratified by God so as to nullify the promise. Well, that means trusting the voice of God to be made right with Him has never been invalidated or canceled. And it's always been how people were made right with God. And it's how we are made right with God today. Okay, and what about faith, follow through, and being righteous with God? Little children, make sure no one deceives you. The one who practices righteousness is righteous, just as he is righteous. The one who practices sin is of the devil.
I'm the devil.
And how do you practice righteousness? A person is made right with God by hearing and trusting His voice, and stays right with Him by continuing to hear and trust His voice. So if you want to be right with God, make it the priority of your life. But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, because blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. And know this, when God sets a table, it's quite a feast indeed.